trackers, we're back with Conviva, one of my favorite companies because they prevent our video from buffering, and we all hate buffering. Originally, we were supposed to get Keith Zubchevich to come, which he didn't come. I'm a little disappointed because he is the best dressed man in streaming, and I always like to see what he's wearing. Please tell him I just want his cast-offs. I just want his Goodwill bag. But Ed Haslam of Conviva was nice enough to come and fill in. He's going to be talking about the evolving OTT content delivery ecosystem, and sit tight because someone in this room is getting an Apple TV at the end. Take it away.
Thanks, Troy. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm not as well dressed, I guess, as Keith, so you'll have to bear with that. So thanks for coming. I don't know how many you're familiar with Conviva, but we help with experience management for OTT providers, both in terms of measuring quality of experience, uniquely from the client perspective. Think of us as essentially being in the glass of the screen, measuring the experience. And then also helping operationalize those metrics so that you can make the data actionable for your business as an OTT service provider, whether that be looking into subscriber intelligence, churn and retention, or whether that be looking at ad-related aspects around pod placement and frequency and duration for ad monetization. So the data is very powerful. So this presentation isn't about that, though. This presentation is about using that data in a greater ecosystem perspective and sharing that data across the ecosystem. So let's jump into why is that important? Well, you know, OTT, it's unique because OTT is, you know, back from when I was a kid watching broadcast TV, and the screen would get fuzzy and my dad would come up and hit the side of the TV and shake the rabbit ears. Then when my son was growing up, we had cable, and we never got off the couch. We could watch whatever we want and everything was great. Well, now my son's a teenager and I'm getting off the couch again, but I'm rebooting routers and throwing Apple TVs around. It's the same situation. We're just coming full circle. And what that means for an OTT provider is really understanding impact analysis of this. So there's an event in your business. Let's call it buffering, let's call it slow video start time, whatever the consumer is experiencing. It could also be pixelation on the screen, you know, down revving of the quality of the video, and they're just not happy. And so one, you need to identify that as quickly as possible. Then you got to go and look and understand, you know, what's the issue behind that, and there's some latency involved with getting that. Then you have to go diagnose and understand what's happening there and get that delivery of that information to the right team. And then finally, you figure out what to do and you take action, right? Well, all this is happening, if you look at the y-axis there, for those of you who remember your math classes, the y-axis is the impact on your business, the time, and the action time here, whoops, went too far, is the value lost to the business. So the longer it takes to solve a problem, the more value you're losing in your business, because your subscribers or your ad-supported viewers are very important to your business, right? So when you think about ecosystem data and ecosystem impact analysis and sharing data across the ecosystem, which I'm going to talk about today, what you're really looking at here, whoops, is really reducing that latency, trying to shorten that period of time it takes from the first time a consumer has a problem to when you, as an OTT service provider, whether you're a publisher or a full-on OVP provider or whoever you are in the ecosystem, shortening the time to solve and resolve that issue decreases the value lost to the business and the impact, obviously, on your subscriber. Right? And so that's the premise of this whole presentation, is how do we reduce time? How do we get things solved quicker? Whoops, I'm hitting the wrong buttons here. So if you look at the simplified view of the internet video delivery ecosystem, if you think about putting in a real-time platform of any kind, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to capture experience data from the devices where the consumers are, because really in the end, everything that's happening inside the delivery ecosystem is pretty complicated, but in the end, all that really matters is consumer experience, right? That's in the end what people care about the most, because the consumer, if you lost a router or your CDN's down, if the consumer can't see that, to a certain extent, who cares? right? Really all you care about is what is the consumer, is happening to the consumer experience. Collecting that data, processing it, and making it available back to the video publisher is sort of the core of what happens there. What is this data? When you look inside the, what are you collecting from the player or from the application? It's a player embedded inside an application for a publisher. You're capturing experience data. You're capturing video start time, buffering times, ad start time, ad pod latency, and engagement time as well, which is how long are they watching each of those things, right? And if you drill into that a little bit more, you can get a lot of interesting data out of the metadata coming out of the player. And the way the publisher instruments the metadata in the stream for you as well, you can start to capture things about when they started playing, when they left, what other events were happening. Did you get a CDN switch in between there? Again, all captured in the URL metadata. What bit rate were they seeing? Did it downgrade the bit rate? And then did they leave soon after that? So there's all this state information that's coming in this data that's very rich. Now the problem with this fundamentally is that these data feeds are enormous. These are coming heartbeated out of these clients, in our case, every 2 seconds, right? And if you think about how many video clients an OTT provider provides, right now we have about 2 billion endpoints we manage. 2 billion endpoints sending a packet or a payload of data every 2 seconds is an enormous amount of data. I remember when Twitter first started and they had this thing they called their fire hose, which is the fire hose of all the tweets coming on the internet. This is even greater in terms of quantity and amount of data coming at the system, and you need to process and make sense of that data so that you can then look for patterns. You can start to do prediction and analytics on these data. You can start to do correlations of when I saw a bit rate drop or a buffering event happen, engagement tends to drop X%, right? So viewing time drops. It might also be different on different platforms. iOS platforms, that correlation might be different than on a Roku device, right? So it's very contextual, very rich set of information coming back into the system that you need to make sense of. And again, think of that introductory graph. It's all about time, right? Because in the end, with enough compute power and enough memory and enough time, you can make sense of any data. But if you're thinking about an OTT business and you're trying to watch, the latest version of Westworld, and I was just joking with a colleague, hopefully something will start happening on that show soon, right? It's very intriguing, but if you have a problem with Westworld, if it starts buffering and you drop from watching it, HBO wants to know that in the moment. They don't want to know it the next day after you're already done and you've been to the office and complained. They don't want to know it the next week after you've decided to drop your Now subscription, right? They want to know in the moment that it's happening. So this notion of real time is incredibly important in this world, right? So what does this mean? So here's an example of the power of data science, and this is just a contrived example. So a buffering event happens, and you look inside, and you see that right now it looks like something related to either the ATT delivery network or potentially the CDN, right? But you're not certain. So there are 3 possible causes of that buffering if you look at the possibility matrix. Either Akamai is overloaded across all service providers, so it's an Akamai issue in a certain region, or potentially AT&T's congested, because Akamai's good in other networks, right? Or then finally, maybe it's just that Akamai's peering point with AT&T is the problem, right? So this correlation, think of all these number of combinations and permutations of possible impact analysis. That's why you need the data science. That's why you need the algorithms and the machine learning that can learn for you and make these correlations for you very quickly, right? And that's the power of QoE data when processed in real time. So now let's jump to the notion of ecosystem analytics. So if you think of that data and you think about how that data can be made available, well, we have a product we've released called our Ecosystem Analytics Initiative, which essentially removes the burden from the publisher from having to figure all this out and then do attestation across all the partners. And instead, what we're trying to offer is we're trying to say anybody in the ecosystem can have access to this data. So the CDNs can have access to it. The delivery network's going to have access to it, the player frameworks, or the network intelligence vendor that you might use. So let's look at that, what that looks like in a little more detail here. So the same sort of picture now, but we're drilling in and looking into the video delivery ecosystem. You might have an OVB provider. You might have your own player framework, your own network operations or network intelligence solution, et cetera, and player framework. So the way the world works today, the data comes across, as I showed before, comes into the video publisher, and the video publisher, in the case of our solution, they have an analytics dashboard that we call Experience Insights. They use that dashboard to see those problems that I just showed, like AT&T and Akamai, potentially there being a problem. But the problem in the world today is then the publisher, the onus is on the publisher to go reach out to all of their ecosystem providers and try to source and figure out what's going on. Where's the problem, right? Which slows, and then that increases that latency that I showed in that first graph. You've increased the time to resolution. So what the ecosystem initiative is looking at doing is saying, take that same data, the same data that the publisher is getting, and provision it in a statistical summary form to each of the constituents that serve that publisher. Give them the same view of the data that the publisher has. So now if HBO gets a call from me watching Westworld and I'm saying I'm upset, and they're trying to figure out, they might call Level 3 and Akamai and say, are there issues? Level 3 and Akamai could have a dashboard saying, we see the same problem. We see it right now and we're fixing it, or we've already started fixing it. Or even in a better case world, they might say, I saw the problem before the consumer even called and I've already started remediation efforts against it. So let's look, what are the benefits here? Obviously, shared view of consumer experience. Again, think of this from a consumer experience. This is a complicated ecosystem. The unique part of this initiative, it's a consumer experience data. It removes the burden from the publisher, shortens the time to resolution, so you can get better business impact on these. And then ultimately, hopefully, we all as consumers get a better quality streaming experience on the internet, because we all know the internet really wasn't built for video, right? It wasn't part of the original architecture, and we're all trying to force fit it to make it work. So let's look at examples today. So we have a number of partners working with us today. Adobe is one of our partners in the player framework. So the Adobe Primetime Player. So the Primetime team has the exact same dashboard now that their shared customers with us have, so that if it's a framework issue with a player, let's say a new version of the player on Android, Adobe can see that very quickly from these same sort of analytics that are coming from us, that then Adobe's service provider customers that they share with Conviva have as well. Another partner, Level 3 is a partner of ours on the CDN space. So again, CDN's obviously a critically important part of any sort of video delivery strategy today. And your CDN providers, all of them potentially having the same view of the data so that they can see buffering, or in most cases with CDNs, it's often the video start time metric that they're most interested in, because they're seeing latency in video starts and trying to reduce that latency, because that's a key metric, a performance metric across CDNs. Again, they have that exact same view, and it's not the view from when they saw the event and how quickly they think they served it. It's the view from what the consumer saw when they clicked play in the player, right, or started the app. InioQuest, another partner of ours in this initiative. So in the video intelligence and looking inside of network and operational intelligence, if you've instrumented your network with InioQuest, now with Conviva, we're sharing information and data. And I have a particular slide I'll jump into. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but it shows, looking at sort of InioQuest's capabilities and using probes and monitoring capabilities within the delivery network, within the CDNs, within the encoding and head-end experience, or the origin server, and marrying that with the Conviva data from consumer experience allows you to do impact analysis. So if you're using InioQuest's solution and you wonder, I have an alert coming from this probe, marrying it with the Conviva data, you can then say, is that alert impacting consumer experience very quickly, right? Instead of guessing or trying to sort it out. And vice versa, if you get an alert from Conviva saying, I see buffering, then marrying the data with InioQuest, you can very quickly do root cause analysis and causal impact of where that buffering event is originating from, because it might be coming all the way back from the origin server, or the way you've encoded, and the delivery network's abilities or the player framework's ability to carry that encoding. And then finally, in terms of partnerships we have in this ecosystem initiative, Verizon, VDMS is a partner in terms of the whole OVP end-to-end solution point of view. So Verizon's a partner who will also have access to the exact same console. So if you're using the Verizon end-to-end solution, sort of a turnkey-like solution that you're seeing increasingly happen in the marketplace with vendors like MLBAM and VDMS, again, now you can rely as a publisher on them having the exact same view you have, and looking at end-to-end, anywhere from encoding to serving to delivery to CDN to the player. They'll have that same view and the same notion of all the analytics across that whole delivery chain. So in conclusion, what does this, this ecosystem data sharing, our point of view on this at Conviva is, this data should be shared across ecosystem constituents, and we should all be sharing data, because in the end, the notion of solving and delivering and producing better consumer experience relies on a lot of different combinations of data, and it requires, as I mentioned before at the very beginning, and that data being commingled and made sense of in real time. It can't be post-processed. It can't be the next week. In some sort of business intelligence, in terms of subscriber retention and churn, latency is okay, but in terms of real-time delivery, especially in live or surge events, because we know on demand now in some cases, you can almost think of as being a surge event. I mean, the Game of Thrones Bastard Bowl drove almost as much traffic on our particular view as the NBA Finals did, right? So some of these on-demand events are like live sporting events. Thanks.
Round of applause for Ed. Ed has left a couple moments for questions. We have one up front here. Coming.
Are there any concerns about sharing proprietary data among the CDN partners? For example, would Level 3 be concerned with Verizon seeing their performance data on their particular CDN? Are you segregating that data?
We are, yeah. Okay. So we're segregating it out, and it's only the view of the data that particular constituent needs on behalf of the publisher. So in the end, the publisher has to grant the authority. Right, so Sky or HBO or whoever has to say, I want Level 3 to have the data, I want Verizon to have the data, whatever, right? And so then we create summary statistics, and so it's not all the raw data across all of them. Yeah.
Okay, who's next? We've got a good crowd here. Who's got a question for Ed? Going once. Okay.